The sun rose slowly over the Great Rift Valley, spilling gold over a landscape that was both lush and unforgiving. At 1.8 million years before the present, the Earth breathed differently. Volcanic soils nourished wide stretches of grasslands, and scattered woodlands clung to life wherever water pooled. Herds of antelope-like creatures grazed alongside massive prehistoric bovids, while predators surveyed them with practiced patience. Among this teeming mixture of ancient life walked the earliest representatives of the genus Homo, the tool-using, adaptable, curious beings later classified as Homo Habilis. They were small by the standards of future humans, with long arms, powerful shoulders, and a gait that teetered between the trees of their ancestors and the savannas demanded by their future. Their brains, though modest compared to modern humans, were extraordinary for their age, clever, opportunistic, and ever attuned to the shifting challenges of their environment. They survived on roots, fruit, scavenged meat, and whatever else could be extracted from a terrain shared with hyenas large enough to challenge lions and leopards much larger than the ones that roam Africa today. Among these early hominins lived a band that traveled along the seasonal migration paths of grazing animals. They moved in small groups, carrying crude but effective stone tools fashioned from river cobbles, flakes sharp enough to slice flesh, hammerstones suited for breaking bones to extract rich marrow. The river valleys were their lifelines, offering both food opportunities and relative safety. But the same areas also attracted competitors far stranger than the predators known today. One particular species had, for generations, held a tenuous and uneasy place in this ecosystem. It towered above the grasses, a creature feathered yet fierce, awkward yet lethal. To a modern eye, it might resemble an oversized bird, something like a monstrous chicken stretched vertically beyond any reasonable limit. Paleontologists would one day refer to its lineage as part of the great flightless ground birds of the early Pleistocene, but to the Homo habilis who shared its world, it was neither bird nor beast, but a dangerous force best avoided. This bird, vastly larger than anything that would later descend from it, stood nearly 3 meters tall. Its bulk outweighed most hominins several times over. Covered in coarse proto-feathers and crowned with a bony casque used for both display and combat, it commanded the terrain with thunderous strides. Its beak, though superficially reminiscent of a modern chicken's, curved into a sharp, horn-like edge capable of crushing bone or tearing flesh. Despite its comical resemblance to poultry, nothing about its presence invited humor for those who lived alongside it. The giant bird thrived on opportunistic feeding, consuming fruits, roots, eggs, small vertebrates, and any scavenged meat it could find. While not a pure predator, its aggressive temperament made it a territorial menace. It would charge at anything perceived as a threat, and few animals dared test it. Its long, muscular legs propelled it at speeds that could outpace nearly any early hominin. Even large predators hesitated to provoke it, often giving way when the giant chicken asserted its dominance over a carcass. The Homo habilis band knew the telltale signs of its presence. Deep, three-toed tracks pressed into the soft ground, feathers scattered like broken quills, and the heavy, rhythmic footfalls that carried across the plain. Many seasons earlier, they had learned to treat the bird's territory with caution. Their world was filled with dangers, but few were as unpredictable or relentless as the towering avian that claimed the river crossing during the dry season. As the climate oscillated between wetter and drier cycles, water became the axis around which all life revolved. When a prolonged dry period set in, the band found themselves forced to return to the river earlier than usual. The ground crackled beneath their feet. Grazers retreated, predators grew bolder, and competition among species intensified. The band's tool-making skills provided some advantage, but stone flakes were limited defenses against nature's larger and stronger inhabitants. During this harsh season, the giant prehistoric chicken lingered near the last remaining pools of water. Its instincts guided it to defend the area fiercely, for survival depended on access to hydration and edible plant matter. As the water receded, tensions mounted among all creatures forced into proximity. The Homo habilis band approached carefully, scanning the terrain from the cover of acacia trees. They saw broken shrubs where the bird had foraged and deep indentations where it had stomped aggressively. They recognized these signs from prior seasonal encounters, but this time the need for water overshadowed their fear. Their survival compelled them to proceed. The giant chicken itself stood not far from the muddy edge of the pool. Its towering silhouette cut a striking figure against the pale sky. It moved with a measured confidence, dipping its beak into the water, then raising its head to scan the savanna. Every movement radiated strength, each stomp kicked up dust and scattered pebbles. The band maintained distance, knowing any sudden action might provoke the bird. They waited for hours, hoping it would retreat to forage elsewhere. But the creature remained, pacing, drinking, patrolling. The dry season had condensed its territory into a narrow, fiercely guarded strip around the dwindling waterhole. For early humans, challenges did not announce themselves with clarity. There were no strategies beyond those learned through instinct, observation, and experience. The band needed water. The bird intended to defend it. Compromise was a concept beyond the minds of both species. As the sun climbed toward midday, the tension in the valley became a silent narrative of survival. The bird stopped pacing and lowered its head toward the ground, searching for seeds and small creatures along the muddy bank. Its attention shifted, just enough to embolden the cautious hominins. The band edged forward. Their feet pressed softly into the dust. They clutched stone flakes and hammerstones, not as weapons but as tools of last resort should they need to threaten or scare. They were not masters of their environment. They were participants in a delicate interplay where caution often mattered more than strength. A sudden rustle from the opposite side of the waterhole, likely a small antelope, caused the bird to raise its head sharply. It issued a low, guttural sound, somewhere between a hiss and a booming exhale. The sound carried across the plain, announcing its irritation. The band froze. A single misstep could trigger violence. The bird's instincts ruled every reaction, and those reactions were swift and devastating. Though the early humans did not think in terms of strategy, they understood danger in a visceral way. Their bodies tensed, ready to retreat. But the bird's attention shifted toward the fleeing antelope-like creature. For several seconds, its gaze followed the movement. In that narrow window, the band crept to the water's edge. They stooped, scooping muddy water into their hands, drinking quickly but quietly. Their hearts pounded as they drank. Every second spent near the pool risked frightening or provoking the bird. They drank until their thirst was softened, then backed away as silently as they had approached. The bird eventually resumed its patrol, oblivious to how narrowly its territory had been shared. The following days unfolded like a slow, tense ritual. The Homo Habilis band remained near the river, forced by the relentless dry season to balance the need for water against the threat of the giant prehistoric chicken. Sunlight burned the open plains, making the shadows of sparse acacias precious refuges for both predator and prey. The hominins had begun to understand the rhythms of the bird's behavior. When it drank, when it fed, when it rested. Observation became their silent ally, their most reliable tool after stone and muscle. The giant chicken, meanwhile, exhibited a strange blend of patience and aggression. Its towering body moved with surprising agility. Long legs propelled it in sudden bursts, yet it could also stand motionless for hours, scanning, listening, waiting. Its eyes, adapted for broad peripheral awareness, detected movement before the faintest rustle of grass could reach the ears of humans. Every crackle of twigs, every flit of birds overhead, every shift in the shadows on the ground became part of the landscape of vigilance. For the Homo habilis, survival demanded innovation. Tools had already granted them partial mastery over meat, bone, and vegetation, but tools alone could not secure water from a resource so fiercely defended. They had begun to experiment with distraction and camouflage, techniques born of necessity rather than conscious planning. Stones were not only weapons, they could be used to create noise, to lure or repel. Branches and reeds became extensions of their bodies, allowing them to blend into the riverbank reeds. Even fire, faint and tenuous in their early mastery, had a role. Smoke, subtle and rising, could shift the attention of the bird for brief windows, long enough to access water. On the third day of this tense coexistence, a breakthrough occurred. The band noticed that the bird, while vigilant, exhibited predictable patterns. It favored the south edge of the pool in the mid-morning, then shifted northward in late afternoon. During the hours it patrolled one side, the opposite bank became vulnerable. This understanding, born purely of observation, gave the hominins a chance to intervene in their own survival. One younger member of the band, slight and nimble, ventured closest to the water during the bird's patrol. The creature's head turned occasionally, following faint movements in the periphery, but the hominin remained low, moving in small, deliberate steps. A stone clinked underfoot, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound, and the bird's head snapped toward the sound. It barked a booming, guttural call and stomped its massive legs, sending dust into the air. The hominins froze. Heartbeats surged like drumbeats in the silence of the dry riverbed. They waited. They had learned, from past encounters, that sudden panic would trigger the bird's aggression. Their movements were deliberate and coordinated, a silent choreography of survival. When the bird resumed its focus on the opposite bank, the humans edged closer, dipped hands into water, and drank as much as their parched bodies demanded. This repeated over days. Each encounter was a lesson, each lesson recorded not in writing but in muscle memory and collective knowledge. They began to anticipate the bird's reactions, adjusting timing and positioning to avoid direct confrontation. Yet there was no complacency. Even when the bird wandered farther than usual, one misstep could provoke an attack capable of crushing bones or displacing entire individuals. The interactions between these species were more than a struggle for water. They were an evolving dance of intelligence, instinct, and adaptation. The hominins learned to interpret subtle cues, the flick of a feathered crest, a shift in posture, a deepening of the bird's call. They learned the limitations of the creature's perception, the patterns of its aggression. Conversely, the giant chicken was equally responsive, adjusting its patrols, its head movements, and its striking distance according to perceived threats. In this early ecosystem, both species were students and teachers of survival. One particularly tense day, the band decided to expand their reach along the river. Food had become scarce and the pools alone could not sustain them. They moved cautiously along the riverbank, keeping low and maintaining visual contact with the bird. It spotted them almost immediately. The bird's chest heaved as it let out a resonant squawk, its taloned feet digging into the soft earth. The ground trembled under its weight. Yet instead of charging immediately, it observed, calculating. The Homo Habilis band had learned to exploit this pause. Using a combination of noise and careful movement, they diverted its attention. Some members clattered stones into the shallows downstream, creating a disturbance in the water. The bird pivoted, investigating the commotion, giving the others a chance to forage along the bank. They collected roots, small reptiles, and insects, all under the looming shadow of a predator-like bird that could easily kill them. This day ended with minor triumphs but also with a harsh reminder of danger. A sudden miscalculation, a misjudged step, a louder-than-expected clatter, triggered a swift attack. The giant chicken charged, legs pounding the earth, wings slapping, beak snapping. The band scattered, retreating to scattered trees and shrubs. One of the hominins stumbled, scraping against sharp rocks, but avoided serious injury. The bird, its territory defended, returned to the water, where it resumed its patrol with the calm dominance of a seasoned predator. The hominins' response was instructive. They did not attempt to fight the bird head-on. Their intelligence had guided them to indirect strategies. They learned to anticipate its behavior, to exploit brief windows of opportunity, to rely on speed, agility, and collective coordination. Every near miss, every careful retreat, reinforced lessons about patience, timing, and the limits of force. Over weeks, this pattern became ritualized. The giant chicken controlled access to the river, but the Homo Habilis band maintained access to survival essentials. They were locked in a perpetual negotiation with nature, where knowledge replaced brute strength, where observation outweighed immediate action. Their brains, evolving and expanding, recorded these experiences not in language but in a complex map of instinct, memory, and kinship coordination. Yet the encounters did more than teach survival. They fostered problem-solving, planning, and perhaps even early forms of what could be called culture. The band began creating small tools specifically for these interactions. Pebbles were smoothed for throwing, sticks sharpened for digging, and arrangements of reeds allowed temporary hiding places. This interplay of learning and adaptation exemplified the remarkable cognitive abilities of early humans. They were shaping tools not just to kill or process food, but to coexist strategically with other dominant species. The giant chicken, in turn, displayed what might be recognized as territorial intelligence. It adjusted its patrol patterns, tested the hominin's behavior, and escalated or de-escalated responses based on perceived threat. Its interactions with humans were not random. The bird had learned from repeated encounters, identifying patterns of movement and exploiting opportunities to assert dominance without unnecessary risk. Both species, in essence, were locked in a dynamic feedback loop. The dry season pressed harder than ever on the Great Rift Valley. Water had dwindled to a series of shrinking pools, each fiercely defended by the massive prehistoric chicken. The Homo Habilis band faced the limits of patience and subtlety. Days of cautious observation and opportunistic drinking had carried them this far, but now the river's final pool was all that remained, a narrow basin of dark, thick water reflecting the harsh sun. The giant bird loomed nearby, its silhouette casting an imposing shadow across the cracked earth. For weeks, the band had perfected their movements, learning to read the bird's posture, its head tilts, and the subtle shifts in its crest that indicated rising aggression. Yet survival demanded more than observation, it demanded action. Each hominin's muscles ached from the heat and exertion, but each heart beat with heightened alertness, sharpened by constant exposure to danger. Their existence hinged on reaching the water while avoiding confrontation, a challenge that had grown in complexity with the birds' increasingly territorial behavior. The day began like many others, a tense, silent vigil from the shadows. The hominins crouched behind scattered rocks, waiting for the right moment. The giant chicken patrolled the pool with measured steps, its enormous claws crunching against sun-baked soil. Its eyes scanned every ripple and shadow, its neck swaying as it weighed threats and opportunities. It had learned to predict the hominin's timing, recognizing patterns of cautious approach, and it had grown increasingly assertive. This time, however, the band had a plan born of accumulated experience. They would not rely solely on observation or distraction. They had discovered an opportunity in the bird's behavior. When it lunged at perceived prey, it committed its entire weight forward, leaving a narrow zone unguarded on the opposite side of the pool. Using this brief gap, the hominins coordinated a simultaneous approach from multiple angles, maximizing their chances to access water while minimizing the risk of attack. As the first rays of the sun glinted across the water, the band moved. Low to the ground, they crept with synchronized precision. A small clatter, a stone nudged by a foot, triggered the bird's attention and it lunged toward the noise. Its massive legs churned dust and debris into the air, wings thrashing, beak snapping. Heartbeats thundered in the hominins' chests. The distraction worked. A narrow strip of shallow water on the far edge of the pool became momentarily accessible. Hunched and moving with rapid, deliberate strokes, the hominins waded into the water. The muddy river clung to their skin, cooling their bodies slightly, offering relief in the harsh heat. The bird reeled back after the initial lunge, reevaluating the situation. Its eyes, sharp and alert, assessed the humans in the water. The decision momentarily hung in balance: to attack fully and risk injury, or to maintain dominance through presence alone. The band seized the moment. They drank, scooped, and splashed water onto parched lips, their muscles trembling from both exertion and adrenaline. Their understanding of the bird's behavior, its predictable responses, its brief lapses in vigilance, was tested in real time. Every motion required precise timing. Any hesitation or error could result in catastrophic injury. The giant chicken, though massive and powerful, was limited by its size. Its bursts of speed were effective only over short distances, and its body could not cover the entire pool simultaneously. This advantage, carefully exploited, allowed the hominins to survive. But survival demanded more than opportunism. It demanded learning from prior failures. A week earlier, one misjudged move had nearly resulted in disaster. A younger member of the band had attempted to dart across the pool too quickly, attracting the bird's attention. A massive foot had slammed into the water mere centimeters from where the human had crouched, sending waves and mud over the others. That close call had reinforced the importance of coordination, caution, and observation. Each member now moved as part of a living strategy, their actions interconnected and anticipatory. As the hours passed, the bird adapted. It began to test the hominins more aggressively, stepping closer to the shallow edges and swinging its head threateningly. Its presence became a living barrier, forcing the humans to act with ever greater care. Yet, in this trial, the band's intelligence proved decisive. They began using more sophisticated tactics, learned from repeated encounters, tossing small stones to simulate movement on one side while advancing on the other, leveraging the bird's natural curiosity and territorial instinct against it. The standoff escalated. The giant chicken lunged at the wrong direction, misjudging the hominin's coordinated deception. A wave of momentum carried it forward, and a single powerful kick sent mud spraying across the pool. The humans reacted instantly, retreating and regrouping behind rocks while still maintaining access to the shallow water. It was a victory not through force, but through clever exploitation of the environment and the bird's own instincts. Days turned into weeks, and the hominins refined their techniques. They learned to read not only the bird's immediate behavior but also patterns of fatigue, hunger, and territorial marking. The bird itself was a teacher, forcing adaptation, creativity, and cooperation. The band began to develop proto-strategic thinking, sequences of actions, contingency responses, and risk assessment. These were not abstract concepts but visceral, embodied intelligence shaped by repeated, high-stakes encounters. Eventually, the turning point came during the peak of the dry season. The river had contracted to a narrow, shallow stream, almost completely exposed. The bird, though still dominant, was visibly stressed by dwindling resources and increasing competition from other species. Its patrols were more predictable, and brief moments of vulnerability appeared more frequently. The hominins recognized the opportunity. Coordinated with almost ritual precision, the band executed a sequence honed over weeks. One member distracted the bird with clattering stones and waving branches, drawing its attention to the far bank. Simultaneously, others advanced along the opposite edge, moving low and fast, scooping water into leaves and containers fashioned from reeds. The bird lunged repeatedly but misjudged timing and distance. Each failed lunge brought exhaustion, both physical and cognitive, making the next window more predictable. In the culmination of this prolonged struggle, the hominins achieved a significant milestone. They accessed sufficient water for the entire band without injury. The giant chicken, though still a formidable presence, had been outmaneuvered through patience, observation, coordination, and intelligence. It was not defeated in the conventional sense. Its size and strength remained, but the balance of interaction had shifted. Survival was claimed not through brute force but through adaptation and learning. This encounter exemplified a broader truth about early human evolution. Intelligence, observation, and social coordination could counter physical disadvantages, even against creatures far stronger and faster. The struggle at the river was a microcosm of the challenges that shaped the development of tool use, cooperative behavior, and problem-solving in Homo habilis. Each encounter with danger, each measured response, left its mark on the cognitive architecture of